even if you had an injury, even if you had a major tear or break or something like that, that should heal after a few months at the most. So if you had it years and decades, he didn't really see that it was inflammation. So he looked into it, and his conclusion, again, he explains it much better than I do, but in a nutshell, was that the real cause of it was actually emotional.
Well, then what about people that feel that they have mechanical causes of pain? Can you talk about that?
Yeah, so I dismissed that a little bit earlier for a reason. So now I want to get into why. That's the perfect lead-in. So as I said, I've always been curious about why does chronic pain only happen to some people with these mechanical issues? We talked about this earlier, right? 100% or 99.999% of people who break a bone are in pain. But only, say, 50, 60, 70, 80% of people with a slipped disc or with a pinched nerve or whatever that is visible in X-ray or ultrasound or whatever, actually, or even a torn something, if this was a while ago, right? Only some of them feel pain, not everyone. So what's the distinction there? So I had a really huge breakthrough in this regard, and I'll kind of explain it as it came to me. So I had this chronic pain issue. I'd had a few different things before around the lower back, around the sacroiliac joint, like repeatedly, but this is something that would kind of be there, and after a few weeks, maybe a couple of months, it would go away. But around just 3.5 years ago, I started to get this pain that just wouldn't go away. And it was around the right rib cage area. And so, having the background that I did, the first thing I assumed is it was like the organs. So I looked into, the liver, the gallbladder, all this stuff. It was that time in Singapore I mentioned earlier where I had ultrasound, CT scan, physical exam, all of it. And the pain was really, really bad. As I said, painkillers did nothing. And they found nothing. No issue, no problem at all. Now, they did say, you have to do an endoscopy and stuff to be sure. But I've done the medical investigation since. So what did we find? I got some toxicity like lead and mycotoxins, some degree of SIBO and SIFO. But when I asked the question of all these things, does that necessarily cause pain? The answer is no, right? Like some people do have pain as a result of any and all of those things. Some people don't. We have no idea what the distinction is. So that's when I went down the medical angle. I also went down the kind of mechanical angle. So I talked to, physios, osteopath, chiropractor, craniosacral, I can't remember, a bunch of stuff. All the mainstream kind of mechanical guys, I guess. And they would give me different answers. Like a chiropractor member said, he felt like my rib had slipped out of place. But again, I'm like, well, why is that the case? Oh, slept funny. It didn't seem like a great answer. What do I actually do about that? Keep coming in for adjustments. So, that wasn't very satisfying. And again, there was no evidence for this. There was no like X-ray or whatever to confirm it. So I heard a lot of, stuff like that. But, and I don't really care if the answer makes sense to me. I only care that if the diagnosis leads to a resolution, right? And all these different diagnoses I got from all these different people, whether it's the mainstream medical, can't find anything wrong. The alternative functional medicine types, you got this type of toxicity. Whether it's, the osteopath, physio types, you got tight muscles, whatever, right? Like no one was offering me an actual solution that actually worked. I did notice some correlations. It would definitely get worse with certain foods. When I asked the doctor why that would be, he said, you might be having an inflammatory response to those foods. Fairly decent answer. When I followed up with why, of course, no answer. So we've really talked about that a lot in this episode. And it would happen with certain movements. But the thing that would really trigger it and set it off and also stop it getting better was stress. And so I was already aware of this. And so, but it wasn't the be all and end all. And of course, it's still a thing like, well, this person's got stress. They're not in pain. Now, having said that, when I really investigated it, I think the stat is 60% of people over the age of 40 have chronic pain. So, and I'm over 40. So I can actually say, actually there's a lot of stressed people who actually do have chronic pain. There is quite a strong correlation. But of course, not everyone. right? There's a bunch of stressed people who do not have chronic pain. So that's why, to me, it's not a satisfactory answer, as we talked about earlier. And so, again, through whatever method, I can't quite remember how, I came across the work of a guy called Dr. John Sarno. And so this is interesting. So Dr. John Sarno was a medical doctor, I believe a GP rather than a specialist, and as mainstream as they come from any kind of background perspective. And in terms of what he did as well, he practiced, I think he died in his mid-90s, and he was practicing well into his late 80s. So he was certainly, a fairly healthy guy himself. And, he had a bunch of, famous clients that he really helped, like Howard Stern, that most people have heard of, Larry David, most people have heard of. He testified before, I think a Senate subcommittee, including people like Bernie Sanders on his theories. So fairly renowned in some ways, but he was always frustrated that what he discovered about the cause of pain did not become mainstream medicine, because it didn't, and it still isn't. So what was it that he said? So I will attempt to say it, but I will not do it justice. I highly recommend you read his book, partly because it's so quick. I think you can read it in like an hour. It's not a long book, and it's called Healing Back Pain. Is it a good thing to read even if you don't have back pain? Yes. What he says is applicable to every kind of pain. And in fact, he has a longer book where he also talks about how it affects allergies and digestive problems and stuff like that. But even the book Healing Back Pain itself, he talks about all kinds of pain: shoulder pain, knee pain, ankle pain, neck pain, whatever, right? So what he basically says in a nutshell is that all of the explanations that he was as unsatisfied with all the mainstream explanations as I was, right? He was like looking and doing x-rays, and he's like, if it's a slip disc, if it's this, if it's a rotator cuff, if it's all of this stuff, why am I also seeing a bunch of people that have the same issue that don't have any pain? That doesn't seem like, so he was unconvinced it was the issue. He also made the point, which I have come across before but had not heard explained so well, that it can't be inflammation in the case of a lot of these things, like lower back pain, which is the most common type of chronic pain. From his view, it can't be inflammation because, as we've said before, that inflammatory response is only in response to something temporarily. Now, I don't think he's quite right about that, because I think sometimes it can be a chronic infection in the intestines, which then leads to a chronic inflammatory response in the intestines, which then radiates out and is felt in the lower back. So I don't think it's quite as simple as that. But again, in a lot of cases, let's say the knee, right? The knee doesn't have an organ that could have a chronic infection right next to it. So what's that then, right? So the point holds, right? You shouldn't, even if you had an injury, even if you had a major tear or break or something like that, that should heal after a few months at the most. So if you had it years and decades, he didn't really see that it was inflammation. So he looked into it, and his conclusion, again, he explains it much better than I do, but in a nutshell, was that the real cause of it was actually emotional. And now this is not a new concept, especially to those who are kind of already into kind of a new agey spiritual world, and for people who have kind of already looked into the mind-body connection. But the thing that I had heard so many times before from those kind of people is like the pain or the illness is a manifestation of like some kind of emotion that you're not addressing. He said something very different. He said, this to me was very unconvincing, because and anyone who's been through chronic pain will identify this. I'm like, bring it on. What emotion is it? Right? I'd rather, there's no emotion that I would, there's no emotion that I would not feel in order to feel this pain, like at any conscious level, right? I would, sure, I don't want to feel despair or fear or whatever it is, but whatever it is, it's better than this pain, so bring it on. Everyone has that attitude. Some people really have major issues with some emotions, and they don't want to feel it no matter what. But at least for me, and I think for many other people, that was an unsatisfactory explanation. But what he talked about is this real key distinction between suppression and repression. I don't know if he actually talks about this, but he made it really clear to me in what he described. So suppression is where you have a feeling come up, maybe a little bit of irritation, a little bit of fear, a little bit of whatever, and you, no, I don't want to let myself feel that way, and you push it back down out of your awareness. Repression means it starts to come up, and before you have any conscious idea about it, some other part of you, unconscious, automatic, goes, no, 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 and pushes it right back down. So you never had any conscious awareness about it in the first place. So it's the repressed feelings that he was talking about. So consciously, you might be like, bring it on, whatever feeling it is. I'd rather feel it than have this chronic pain. But unconsciously, a part of you is going, this feeling is so dangerous. This feeling is so unbearable. This feeling is so overwhelming, because it often was, this is often childhood stuff, right? When we're really young, we're really not equipped to deal with extremely traumatic feelings, especially when, we don't have optimal then environment afterwards to help to, tend to it if it's constant trauma or constant neglect or whatever it might be. So we don't have the capacity to handle those feelings. We don't have the prefrontal cortex, the ability to think it through and rationalize and all the stuff that we do now. So we have this defense mechanism that just says, keep that out of awareness. It is too dangerous. And so that's repression. And so his theory was, when you have that chronic physical pain, a lot of the time, not always. So he's a medical doctor. He'd always do an examination of people first. Is it this? Is it that? Is it that? But in a lot of cases, he would go, actually, it's nothing medical. It's emotional. It's that there's something that some part of you doesn't want to let you feel. But the thing that's complicated about this is there's another part of us that's constantly trying to bring these feelings to the surface. This is why we have a tendency to replay traumas over and over again, right? The classic example of someone who, had an abusive parent and then gets into one abusive relationship after another. Part of that you could say is like a neurological habit, and maybe a behaviorist will look at it that way. But there's also the theory that the reason that we're doing this is because part of this is trying to make us aware of this feeling that is in our unconscious, that is really undermining our whole quality of life. But there's a big part of us that doesn't want us to feel it. And so that part of us that doesn't want us to feel it creates the physical pain as a distraction. So that's a theory. So it's a distraction. It's not a manifestation of a feeling. It's a distraction from the feeling that a part of you feels would be too unbearable to feel. So that's a theory. The interesting thing is that his experience and many decades of practice, and he trained a bunch of other doctors and stuff, and it's a whole system these days. They call it TMS, I think, tendon myofascial syndrome, something like that. Sorry, I don't remember it exactly, but we'll link to his work. But yeah, it's a whole system these days. But basically, he found that, he said 90% of people, when they were told that they don't have a real problem, they only have pain that is a distraction from emotion, the physical pain went away and didn't come back. So that was proof to him that was the issue in many cases. Now, what about the 10% of people? And, that was his record. I've seen other people who teach his method. Maybe they have 20% of people who it doesn't work for, or 30% of people, right? I'm not saying it always works for everyone, but a massive amount of people, way more than you think, right? Just hearing from a doctor, from an authority that they trust and believe in, you don't have a physical problem, the physical problem goes away, right? Now, for some, it doesn't. And so his explanation for that was that then that just happens to people who've had a lot of trauma earlier in their life that they haven't resolved and that they haven't dealt with. And there's a lot of support for that. We'll get into that in a second. Just before I get into that, I want to address why he had so much resistance with this theory, right? And so there's this idea that the mind and body are separate, that the vast majority of the medical establishment, the mainstream, still clings to, right? So that how you feel and your physical health, obviously not just pain, but all kinds of illnesses, are fundamentally unrelated, let alone, maybe it's not an exact cause, and there could be a bunch of physical stuff as well, but no, not even that, just nothing to do with each other. And so I find that quite interesting. We can talk about why, how that came about and all the rest, the division of mind and body that maybe Descartes, the philosopher Descartes started, and all the rest of it, and Aristotle and blah, blah, blah. But I won't bother going into that. what I will say is why I find it interesting. The reason I find it interesting is the same person who, and probably not many of them will be watching this kind of video, but the same person who right now is probably going to be dismissing what I'm saying in their head or maybe in the comment section will be the same person who will dismiss almost anything that people like me recommend on the grounds that there aren't enough double-blind, peer-reviewed, placebo-controlled studies, right? Where are the studies? What kind of studies? Oh no, that study's no good. Why not? It's low quality. How is it low quality? Because it's not a double-blind placebo-controlled study. That's the only type of study that the sticklers for truth and facts, who I'm all for, will accept, right? But here's the thing. Why is that so important to do a double-blind placebo-controlled study? It's so important because there's something called the placebo effect. So what a double-blind study is they'll give, say, usually it's done with pills. So they'll give a pill with some drug in, some active ingredient to half of the people, and then they'll give a pill with nothing to the other half. And then they won't tell people which they're getting, obviously. But they won't even tell the people handing the pills out which they are. So that's the double blind. Not only is the person receiving the pill blind, as in they don't know what they're getting, the person handing out the pill is blind. They don't know why they're getting. It's a lot of hassle. It's really expensive. It's really time consuming. It's really tedious. Why would they go to all that effort? And why would they go to all that cost unless it was absolutely necessary? They wouldn't. So why is it absolutely necessary? Because the placebo effect is so strong. So placebo effect means if you take something, let's say this is the most common example of placebo effect. If you take a pill and you believe it's going to cure you and it's handed to you by an authority that also has credibility in your eyes and they believe it's going to cure you, it has a high chance of curing you even if there's nothing in there. That's the placebo effect. There's also something called the nocebo effect. If someone you don't trust hands you something that you don't think is going to work, then it's much less likely to work, even though it should cure you, technically, based on biochemistry. And then there's also I don't know what the term for this is, anti-SIBO, where they did studies where they would take people, give them a sedative and tell them it's a stimulant, and they had a sedative effect from it. And they gave people, and they did the opposite. They gave people a stimulant, told them it's a sedative. Maybe I just said that. Basically, they did it both ways. And it worked both ways, right? So you can hand something to someone, and if they believe it enough, it will cure them when there's nothing in it. It will not cure them, even though it should. And it will literally stimulate their immune system when it should calm it down, and vice versa. So that's how powerful the placebo effect is. That is how powerful the impact of the mind on the body can be. It can literally save your life if you have a terminal, or maybe not terminal, but life-threatening disease. And it can also kill you if you believe that it's not going to work when in fact it should, right? So this is literally a life and death matter. It's that important. Loads of people have done great work on this. Joe Dispenza, who I've mentioned before, I'm a fan of, his book, You Are the Placebo, was great. He lists, example after example. Tony Robbins does it as well. But this is, again, I know those people might be considered fringe. This is mainstream medicine. As I say, the very foundation of mainstream medicine. The whole reason that all the supplements that I believe in and use and all the rest of it will be dismissed by these people is because where are the studies? Where are the studies? What's the double-blind placebo-controlled studies? Why does it matter? I know I'm harping on this a little bit, but so many people dismiss this. And now even the people, you're open to this kind of stuff, you're watching this video, you're into it, but you still might be kind of skeptical about this section of the video. And this is why I'm doing this quite strongly now, to say, this is how powerful the mind can be. So given that the mind is so powerful, that the whole medical pharmaceutical industry is based around having to control for this placebo effect, right? Could this be a factor? And I would say potentially yes. So back to Dr. Sarno, his understanding is that usually the emotion that is at the root of a lot of these pain issues is anger. My understanding is that's because it's the most commonly repressed feeling. It's one of those feelings that's considered dangerous, and many people feel justifiable, right? Like if I allowed myself to feel how angry I am deep inside, I would kill everyone. I would kill myself, right? Whatever. So I can't, right? I would, or maybe not as dramatic as that, but I would hurt the people I love, and that's unthinkable. And so therefore I can't allow myself to feel it, right? And then, so that's an example of a dangerous emotion, right? Murderous rage. And so we keep it below the level of consciousness. And so is being in chronic pain better than murderous rage? Yeah, to some people, absolutely. You know, for some people, it's loneliness. So there's a lot of, you know, I was just reading a book by someone called Carolyn Myss about, what's it called? Why People Don't Heal and How They Can, something like that. You might be familiar with this, Chrissy. And, you know, she makes the point that a lot of people, especially the kind of person, so this is a different kind of person, rather than the kind of person who represses anger, though there could be overlap, the kind of person who dedicates their whole life to helping others, they're always the more responsible one, they're working hard, and then, you know, eventually they get ill, and maybe they get ill for purely physical reasons, that's perfectly possible, like some of the stuff we talked about. But then when they get ill, suddenly they have to learn to look after themselves. They start seeing all these practitioners and people who are like caring about them and caring about their needs and asking how they're doing and caring about if they're well or not. They start going to support groups. They feel that sense of community. They might feel that sense of real connection because, you know, a lot of their interactions are very surface level, but when you have like a life-threatening disease or severe pain, you can often cut through all the bullshit and have a really deep connection with people quite quickly. And so then when it comes to why am I not getting better, it can be, well, because I would feel unbearably lonely if I was better. I would lose this support group. I would lose all these people who are looking after me and taking care of me. Or maybe I wouldn't feel unbearably lonely, but I'd feel unbearably overwhelmed because I'd go back to my life where everyone's depending on me and I don't have time to look after myself and all the rest of it. So, you know, those are just two examples. Anger is one example, like loneliness is another example, but there can be these deep feelings that are, and so we might think, oh, God knows I do not want to be in pain, but that physical pain may, if you really, really think about it, might actually be preferable to the emotional alternative that may feel there for you. And so this is something that's really important to look at.
No, that's really good. I mean, I've always felt, well, I'm sure there's a lot of other things out there. You know, the body's always telling you the truth. You know, there's so many studies, you know, especially in the FBI where they get people to watch your body language, everything else. You know, the hints are there. It's the awareness of them. Or if we are, you know, as you're saying, if we repress something, we're not aware of it, you know, and so then it's bringing up that conscious awareness in the way that we can potentially do something about it. But going back to what you were saying of how powerful the brain is, especially around the placebo effect, and that, you know, even though the anti-SIBO effect as well too, where you're saying they were given us you know, the sedative, but it said it was a stimulant, and then that's that. Within all of this, and back into Dr. Sarno, with the pain, and that it's keeping something from us, and forgive me if I'm not reiterating it correctly, then if the brain is and the mind is what's controlling all of it, then talk to me about that and how we get out of it.
Well, it's a good question. So as I said, his experience was that in many cases, and this is why reading that hour or so long book could be the greatest thing you ever did. Like, can reading a book cure you? Maybe, right? And so this was his experience a lot of the time. I'll tell you another time that reading a book cured me. It was a cure me of smoking. Alan Carr, his Stop Smoking book. I literally read the book, and by the end of reading the book, I no longer wanted to smoke and never smoked again. So it can be as simple as that. And so that's kind of an addiction to smoking. So I guess this, you could almost say, is an unconscious addiction to physical pain as a distraction from deeper emotional pain, trauma, or other psychological issues. And so his perspective is that awareness was the cure. And so his treatment, if just the session with him where he told you that, you know, the root was emotion, that there was no physical problem, it was emotional, or if reading the book was not enough, would be then to do a course where you would go and attend seminars and lectures where it would basically just be hammering home the point. You don't have a physical problem. It's emotional. That was his basic treatment. It was 100% awareness-based treatment, which is really, really interesting. Now, he did say there's that small percentage of people that are highly traumatized that's not enough. Awareness isn't enough. And they have to actually deal with the underlying trauma. And so I'll get into that in a second. But I just wanted to address another point. The other thing that I really loved about Dr. Sarno is he really explained to me not just why that happened, but how. So what, and this like really explained to me, because one of the ways that you can tell that your chronic pain is perhaps this is because it's not consistent. So one of the things that I would have is that this pain would just move around. And so this is not just the case of digestive pain. This could be a lower back pain, right? One time it's in your sacroiliac joint, then you feel it more in your glute, then you feel it more in your, your lumbar region. Like it moves around a bit. Or, of headaches, right? You feel it more in your temples, and then it's more in the center of your head and all the rest. So, and then, especially for physical things, if you're convinced it's a physical thing, right? Like he would say, one of the things that he noticed is that when he actually did a physical examination of people, and you'd press on the same spots and they would always be painful. And if I remember correctly, it was like the neck, it's always painful there. It's always painful in the lower back. It's always painful pressing in the glutes. It's always painful pressing the trapezius. So now sometimes the pain may show up in different places. Like at some point you may be more in the lower back, another time then now it's your neck is locked up and all the rest of it. But if you've always got pain somewhere, but the pain moves around, that's definitely one of the signs. Whereas if it's very stubbornly, consistently, persistently in the same place and doesn't move, that makes it a little bit less likely to be purely emotionally based. That's one of the things that I understood. But yeah, I didn't actually say what I was going to say. What he explained is that how the mind and specifically the brain does this. So from his point of view, because still, even though he's using words like mind, he was a medical doctor, he was a materialist guy. So his understanding is that the brain would send a signal to reduce the blood flow just slightly to a specific area of the body. And that reduction of blood flow over time would mean there's a lack of oxygen getting to it, and then there's a lack of toxins getting out of it. And so that would build up especially acidity in that area, because when there's not enough oxygen getting into a cell, it has to go more into the burning carbohydrate type of oxygen production, the anaerobic type of oxygen production, which creates more of an acidic byproduct than the aerobic type of energy production. And so basically, when you do anaerobic exercise, this is why your muscles start to become sore, right? And so imagine you have a constant anaerobic situation because your brain is just restricting that blood flow to and from that area of the body just a little bit. So that really beautifully explained to me how you could get this really bad pain, and yet it could just go away just as easily as well, because it only takes the brain deciding, actually, let's just stop doing that, bring the blood flow back in. Within a few minutes, the oxygen goes right back, no problem anymore. And I experienced this. One of the many things I tried is something called prolozone therapy. And this is where they inject oxygen, basically, ozone, into a specific area. And it's a version of prolotherapy. Mm-hmm. Basically, one of those treatments of pain if nothing else works. And absolutely, it created a lot of relief. But again, it's one of those things, it's like, why is oxygen not getting in? Why do I have to go to a guy to inject me with oxygen? Why is enough oxygen not just getting to that area like it should be? So yeah, there's just one more thing I want to say about the placebo effect, actually. And it's, how does that work? Because as I hope I demonstrated, the placebo effect is hugely important when it comes to the effectiveness of everything, especially in the realm it's usually used a lot to do the double-blind testing, which is drugs or medications. So the question then occurs to me, like, how does the placebo effect actually work? And one of the things that we know fairly well is how it doesn't work is through words or verbiage, right? So, and the thing that kind of proves this is how relatively ineffective affirmations are, right? And I don't mean to be down on affirmations. Sometimes they can work and sometimes people have really good results for them. But still, for those of you who are in pain right now, who's presumably is who's going to be watching this, you know probably perfectly well that just saying, I'm not in pain, I'm not in pain, I'm not in pain, even if you repeat it like a mantra for an hour, it doesn't work, right? And you could, the hypnotist kind of contingency would say, well, that's because, your subconscious doesn't understand the word not, Elwin. So, okay, how about even if you say, I'm experiencing, my body is a source of endless pleasure. My body is a source of endless comfort and ease, right? You could even repeat that to yourself as a mantra for an hour affirmation or an ongoing basis. It probably won't work, sorry. So there has to be more to it than just words. I think that's the key point that I'm trying to make clear. And there is. And so the person who I think the placebo effect is a huge thing that has actually been understood throughout the ages. I studied a little bit about even the ancient Egyptian approach to medicine, and they had a lot of interesting stuff that, we do these days. Like their medicine 4,000 years ago was way more advanced than probably what was in our culture even 500 years ago. They had some interesting stuff. And yet still, they didn't have, their medicine was not as advanced as ours is now, as far as we know. But they had that kind of very scientific medicine approach as far as they were able to. But they also had an attitude of healing through belief, right? Through making a person believe that maybe they were channeling the gods or the gods were healing them or something like that. I don't want to, talk too much about it because it's not what we're talking about here. But and this is the case throughout history, right? That there's been shamans, witch doctors, herbalists, medicine women, men, all the rest of it, who through the power of belief have had some success, not 100%, but then again, modern mainstream medicine is also not 100%, right? But some success at healing people just through the power of belief. And often this works better, especially when the person is in a conceptual framework of viewing the world where they really, really believe in God or the gods or whatever. And then if they believe that a representative of that is, giving them the right to heal, then it really makes a shift in them. There's some evidence that has been how we have managed to heal throughout history. And again, as I say, if that all sounds too nebulous and unscientific for you, the whole basis of testing of all scientific drugs is the fact that the placebo effect is real, right? So I'm just speculating on how it might be used throughout history. So if it's not words that govern whether a placebo effect works or not, what is it? And so there are loads of people who've done great work on this subject, to be honest. But the person who I really like, and I've mentioned several times already in this series, is Dr. Joe Dispenza. He did a great book called You Are the Placebo, which I thought was such a genius idea because, of course, whenever people get into any kind of healing through the power of the mind, the immediate aspersion, accusation that will be cast onto them is like, it's bullshit, it doesn't work, it's not real. And if it does work, then it's just the placebo effect. And so Joe Dispenza kind of very interestingly turned that on his head and he said, no, it is the placebo effect. We're not arguing with that. But our point is, we're showing you how to take control of the placebo effect consciously. So you don't have to be tricked by an external authority into believing that you have had something that will heal you. You can actually trick, convince, shift your paradigm, however you want to put it, yourself into believing that you are healed. So that's kind of like the essence of his system. Not to minimize it, it's great, but that's kind of like the bottom line of it. There is more to it, and we'll actually talk a bit more about other aspects of it in a bit. But that's like a key understanding. And so that placebo effect power, what is it? So he says that it's a combination of a feeling in your body and then a vision as well, right? So a doctor or a trusted authority hands you a bottle of pills. They're just sugar pills, but he doesn't know that. You don't know that. And he says, or she says, sorry to be gender discriminatory, they say, this is medicine that will heal your condition, right? And you believe it. Now, what does that process of believing it entail? It's probably going to entail a feeling, and it may entail a vision of, oh, at last, and then like imagining yourself better, right? That's what he says. I would actually refine that down even more. From my perspective, I don't know the vision is crucial either. I think the feeling is the bit that is all important, that absolute expectation that something will work, or even as we talked about in the case of the nocebo, that absolute expectation that something won't work or that will work differently than, what it should do. That absolute belief, that feeling, that expectation is really key. So to go back to Dr. John Sarno's work, the idea that a feeling, repressed or otherwise, could completely control your health is not that crazy. And what was interesting that he said that I liked is that it was actually that is the mechanism of how it works. Now, he wrote this book, I think in the 80s or 90s. So he was doing a little bit of speculating. But what he said is that, if the body wanted to create pain or indeed digestive problems and allergy issues, those are the other kind of things that he identified are very commonly caused by, feelings, repressed trauma or whatever. All it would need to do is not remove, but just slightly restrict blood flow to a specific area of the body. And by doing that, it would stop nutrients, especially oxygen, getting to that area of the body in sufficient quantities or in as much as it used to, as it did before that slight restriction. And then, of course, it would also stop toxicity or the buildup of natural metabolites or whatever, but the waste product getting out of that area if that blood flow in and out was reduced. Does that make sense so far, Chrissy?
Yeah, it does. Definitely. Thank you.
Okay. So, and the thing about oxygen particularly caught my attention because, of course, one of the sources of pain that we talked about is inflammation. But another thing that does cause pain is a buildup of acidity. And everyone who exercises intensely knows this, right? That when you exercise anaerobically, what does anaerobically mean? It means that, say, it's usually referred to heavy weight training, but actually it's true for sprinting, or it's anything where the amount of exertion, the amount of energy production that's required, you can't breathe hard enough or you're not breathing fast enough, hard enough to keep up with that energy demand. And so the process by which your body creates energy using the mitochondria, which are the energy production factories inside every cell, because there's not enough oxygen to do it the efficient way, it has to go to the backup system, which is the anaerobic system. And the problem with that is that the anaerobic system, the system where it converts glucose into ATP without enough oxygen, is very inefficient. That's one problem, which is why it tends to be when you do that anaerobic exertion, you can't do it very long. For most people, a few minutes at the most. That's why they usually say a minute or two of lifting weights and then the other thing is that it builds up acidity. And of course, that's an issue. That's, the burn that they talk about and why eventually you have to stop, right? It's the feeling that tells you, too painful, gotta stop. And so that's acidity. So that's like a high level, intense version. But what he's postulating is that by that slight restriction of oxygen, especially, and then the buildup of acidity in a specific area of the body, that would then create pain. And so the brain would restrict that blood flow just a little bit to cause that, but it could just as easily unrestrict it, of course. And so that's what he said.
So with all of that, is that something you believe? Is that, do you know that to be true?
I don't know, but I will tell you it's very interesting. So as I said, he had experience where there was a good documentary about him. I'd say good, not great, but I wouldn't say it's the first thing you should. I know a lot of people want to watch something before they read, but I wouldn't say it's the first thing that you get into. But I would say once you've read the books and you want to find out more, it's good. It's called All the Rage because, as I said, Dr. Sarno believed it was especially anger and rage that would show up as pain. But in there, you get testimonials from, I think there was a US senator, these are not, what's the word, foolish people who are, taken in by quackery, right? These are some very established people who, have a lot of authority and gravitas over themselves saying, I went to see him. He told me it was all, it was just like my body's way of distracting me from, or my brain's way of distracting me from emotions. And it went away and it never came back, right? So that's something that people say over and over again. Now, unfortunately, that wasn't my experience. So I can't be that confident about that. But my experience is, interesting in a different way. So what happened for me is that when I started doing what he recommends, and what he recommends, by the way, one of the key facets is to treat it as if it's not a physical problem. So he said he used to send people to physios and then he stopped doing it and he found that the results were actually better if they didn't. Not because the physios weren't helping, because it does help a bit to improve blood flow and all the rest of it, but because it kind of solidifies that belief that what you're dealing with is a fundamentally physical problem. That's the problem with it. And so...
I was going to say, can you clarify a little bit more deeply on what it means when he says that, focus that it's not a physical problem?
Yeah, so when I say physical, I mean specifically mechanical. This is almost always what you hear from people if you ask them, why are you in pain? Why does your knee hurt? Why does your back hurt? They always say it's a mechanical thing. A slipped disc, a tight muscle, a torn ligament, or whatever, right? It's always something like that. And so his perspective, and as we said, this is very legitimate, acute over the course of the first few months. But if we're talking about years and decades later, his position was that's not the reason anymore in a lot of cases anyway, although he'd always examine people to check. And so, so maybe I should clarify more that it's not a mechanical problem, that it's not, that it's fundamentally based on emotions. And so if you go to see a physio or any of these people who treat it as if it is a mechanical problem, it affirms in you that it is a mechanical problem. So that's the key thing. So when I did this thing about, okay, so it's not a physical problem, he says, basically just ignore it, like when you get the pain, ignore it, just tell your brain, I'm not falling for it, I know you're just trying to distract me from the feeling, right? I want to know what the feeling is. So when I did that, what was very interesting is what happened for me is the pain moved. And I had kind of a greatest hits of every type of intense pain that I'd had over the last 20 years. So the rib one went, and then I had a lower back pain on the right, lower back pain on the left. I had intense stabbing pain in my right sinus, which I actually used to get in my 20s. I hadn't had it for ages. And in my tooth, in my ear, just all around. And then it would last for a day or two, and I'd keep saying, this isn't real. I know this is just my brain trying to trick me, trying to make me avoid an emotion. And then a day or two later, it would just go away again. Now, if you compare that to before, where I would have these issues and nothing I did would make the problem, nothing physical, mechanical that I did would make the problem go away. It was interesting, right? Now, I guess that doesn't prove that the problem was only based on emotion, but what it does prove to me is that at least the brain can create any of those symptoms out of nowhere. Do you see what I mean?
Yeah, I do. Let me also ask you for this. Does it matter that you know what emotion the brain is trying to distract you from?
That's a good question. And the answer seems to be, it depends. Not necessarily. So even Dr. Sarno, who claimed really the highest success rate, the other people who've kind of followed his work, say more 70 to 80% of people, all they need is awareness. But he said 90% of people, what they need is awareness. But whatever it may be, there is that still 10, 20, 30%, whatever of people that awareness isn't enough. That just awareness of the fact that it is really an emotional issue is not enough. And then those people, he said, usually they had highly traumatic backgrounds, highly traumatic lives. And he said they need to work with a therapist to work out what's actually going on. So the answer is it depends. Yeah. If just the awareness is enough, then just the awareness is enough. That's great. But I think the general recommendation is yes, Chrissy, absolutely, to try and find out what feeling it is. And I know you said earlier about, you might be ignoring this feeling for this reason. I gave a few examples. But I wanted to add to that, you may be someone who actually gets angry all the time, for instance, but you would never allow yourself to be angry towards your parent or towards your child or towards your spouse, right? And so it may not be that you're completely out of touch with a feeling, but it may be that you're out of touch with a feeling in relation to a specific person or maybe a specific situation. And that can still be enough then to cause enough repression that it can really show up in this way.
Well, then, with all of that, if it's just the brain trying to distract you from feeling the emotion, then does that mean that the pain is real or not real?
Yeah, that's probably the most common question I get when I try and explain this and it's more of an objection. It's does that mean are you saying it's not real? My pain's real, right? It's no. No one's saying your pain isn't real, right? And this is what I loved about the Dr. Sarno's description, because I've certainly heard other people say, that the pain is psychosomatic, which I think is the word for it. But I think the common misunderstanding of what psychosomatic means is like it's a figment in your brain. It's like the equivalent of a hallucination, right? Seeing something that's not there. That's not what we're talking about. The pain is real in the sense that, as we said, this is Dr. Sarno's speculation, that it could be simply a restriction of blood flow to an area. So that's a physical phenomenon that causes real pain. But from his perspective as a medical doctor, all medical doctors, even doctors like Dr. Sarno, don't care about anything unless it's serious, right? It's not serious. Sure, it's ruining the quality of your life, and he does talk about that as well. So I don't want to put words in his mouth. I mean, he would say it's serious, but it's not medically serious, is what I mean, right? You can have this crippling thing that completely ruins your life for decades, but it's not medically serious. That's a key understanding, because as we talked about at the beginning of talking about chronic pain, one of the worst things about chronic pain is, of course, the whole point of pain is to convince you there's something seriously wrong now. And so that's what that signal means. And so to understand, actually, in this case, there isn't. I mean, maybe there is, but it's emotional, psychological, traumatic. It's not physical. There's nothing majorly physical wrong. That doesn't mean you're imagining it. That doesn't mean it's not real, but it means that it's not serious enough to be a medical emergency, but it certainly feels worse than medical emergencies. Of course, intense chronic pain is terrible, and it can absolutely ruin the quality of your life, even if it's intermittent. So it is real, but it's not. And then the other thing is, and Dr. Sarno wasn't aware of this, but there's a whole field these days called psychoneuroimmunology. And so in a nutshell, and sometimes they even add the word endocrine as well, psychoneuroendocrinal immunology. But basically what this field is all about is the connection between the mind and the body, all the stuff we already talked about. But specifically what it's about is the impact that our thoughts and feelings have on our immune system. Because as we talked about earlier in terms of inflammation, it's that easy for you to be in pain or not, depending on how your immune system is doing. So there is also exploration as to whether it's the case that simply having a painful thought, or even repressing a painful thought, or having a painful thought repressed, can affect your immune system. And then ditto, having a transformation around that could immediately shift the immune system and then immediately get rid of the pain through the inflammation pathway rather than through the buildup of acidity pathway. So those are two good theories as to how even very intense chronic pain could be created by the mind, for want of a better word, really the feelings more than anything.
There's a lot that I know of that I've read about, different things with, emotions are stored in the body. Trauma is stored in the body. Can you speak to how these two interplay with what you've just been talking about and trauma within the body?
Absolutely. And this is a rabbit hole I also went down. I'd looked into, trauma before, but in terms of this pain thing specifically, because of course, when I heard about this idea about the brain restricting blood flow to certain areas, that seemed like a real aha moment. I wanted to kind of understand that a little better. So one of the key ideas I would say is that this idea that trauma is stored in the body. Now, this is something that is not 100% accepted in science, like in the mainstream of medicine, but it's pretty big. And I would say it is accepted from what I've seen these days in the mainstream of the psychology, psychotherapy kind of world, at least, as in mainstream accredited therapists will generally agree with this. I'm not sure if medical doctors would. I think the distinction probably that a lot would make, which is kind of meaningless from a practical point of view, but maybe technically true, is that the trauma is not technically stored in the body. It is still stored in the brain, but it acts like it's stored in the body. So what I mean by that is often the way it will show up is in chronic patterns of holding the body in certain positions. And this seems to be related to trauma. Now, whether the body is doing that on its own or whether that's the brain telling it to do that is a bit of a thing that has not been fully explored. But I'm actually kind of in alignment with this idea that the brain really is ultimately running it, which I'll talk about in a little bit. But despite that, it's useful to think of it as if it's this trauma is stored in the body, because that's how we experience it in a practical level. And of course, the whole separation between brain and body is absurd, right? Because the brain is part of the body, but usually when we talk about trauma being stored in the body, we mean like below the neck, right? It's in the whole body. And there, of course, there are other brains in the body, right? There is the gut brain that is kind of a brain. It has some neurons. There's some evidence that the heart has its own brain. So even this is not clear cut. But anyway, let's just talk about this general idea about trauma. So there's a great book called The Body Keeps the Score. I think hugely impactful. A lot of people in the psychological community are familiar with it. It talks about this basic idea, which has been around for a long time, I would say. I would actually go back to Reich, Wilhelm Reich, who was a student of Freud, who was really the founder of psychology, psychoanalysis, therapy, all of that didn't even exist before Freud. So I would say, a direct student of Freud certainly talked about this a lot. They talked about this concept of character armor, he called it, where he talked about it in a specific way that the body keeps the score, or does not. The body keeps the score, talks about it in a lot more general scientific way, but Reich talks about it specifically in the sense that certain traumas, and traumas don't have to be dramatic events, right? They can be, a pattern of neglect, for instance, especially during the first year or two of life. But traumas, the things that the person perceives as traumas will lead to certain specific holding patterns. And so he identified, and that actually, holding patterns of the muscles, and that would actually also affect the person's personality, the person's beliefs, the person's mindset, the person's level of energy, their focus, all kinds of stuff. Like his theory on how all this works, I think was very interesting. Why it didn't take hold is maybe a discussion for another time, but I think in a nutshell, it's because, he's a student of Freud and there's no healthy type, like these days therapy, they focus more on health and happiness and stuff like that. That's a fairly recent thing, but in the last few decades, his thing was like diagnosing what type of dysfunction you are, as it always was back then. Another thing is that the solution was not just sitting around talking, although I'm not against sitting around talking. Awareness is hugely important, but his solution was more about doing a lot of very strenuous physical activity, which you can see would be off-putting to people. And his solution really as well was actually unrepressing. We talked about the definition of repressing earlier, right? Doing this intense physical activity until these feelings would come up. And it really, it's very effective from my perspective and generally from the perspective of people who do it, but it's easier to, and this is the criticism of therapy, which is, quite valid. Some people go to it for years and decades and they just talk about their problems every week and nothing really changes. How they think doesn't really change, their feelings don't really change, their behavior doesn't really change. So that is possible, right? It's possible with talk therapy to go in and not really change. It's not really possible if you push the intense body therapies like Reichian therapy. It's not the only one. Bioenergetics is another one. There's a bunch of other ones. Some of them are heavily reliant on breathing. Some of them aren't. But there's only, I would say Reichian and bioenergetics are like an elite level where they are the most challenging and where it's the most difficult to stay repressed while you do them. It's still possible, but
let me ask you, why do you think when you take your body to that level of exertion that these feelings are opened or unrepressed or come to the surface?
It's a great question. And again, because this is not a super popular strategy, it's not fully understood. So EMDR is a good example, or EFT, emotional freedom technique. So unlike Reichian system, EMDR and EFT are quite popular in the mainstream therapy world. And so EMDR is basically doing these back and forth eye movements while feeling an intense emotion. EFT is basically tapping on specific areas of the body whilst feeling an intense emotion. There's some research into those as to why these fairly innocuous seeming things have such a massively powerful transformative effect in many cases at helping people to become aware of traumas and become aware of habitual conditioned patterns of feelings and behavior related to traumas, why it helps people clear that. But I don't think it's 100% clear exactly how it works. The theory, as I understand, I'm happy to give you a theory, is that, so it's back to that brain-body connection. So the theory is, and this goes back more to the Reichian system, that it's actually really, really difficult to repress these intense feelings. And so while you have a part of your brain or mind, or whatever you want to call it, that's trying to protect you and keep those feelings below your awareness, so that if anyone points them out to you, like, oh, no, you literally no idea. Again, different from suppression, where you're just holding it down. So you have no idea. So to keep that situation is not particularly easy. And so the Reichian perspective is, or the bioenergetics as well perspective is, the way that the brain accomplishes that is by having these chronic patterns of holding. And so, and exactly why that works, why chronic patterns of holding. So like this, defensive posture, for instance, that a lot of people have, right? That's the classic one. This is like a self-protective mechanism, again, that all animals will do as well, right? Make themselves small, and then as well, moving the shoulders forward, that kind of protects the chest, the vital organs, right? So that kind of chronic posture like this. How that works exactly, I don't know if that has been understood or if that's been proven. If you have seen research in that regard, as always, leave it in the comments. I would be very interested. But for whatever reason, that seems to be how the body represses. And so when you do this, either intense, so there's kind of two different types that work. We're skipping ahead a bit, but I'm happy to do it. We're all over the place in my plan today. How it seems to work. Okay, so in terms of like a Reichian or bioenergetics, that's very intense body work. And the way that seems to work is like and there are other like breathing practices that are similar for this, for the breathing mechanism specifically. Like rebirthing is like an example, or holotropic breathing, where you're really like pushing your breathing mechanism very hard. So what I like about bioenergetics and Reichian is that they're very whole body, right? They're not just working like a certain area of the body, not just the lungs, not just this. Like they'll do the face, the throat, every muscle in the body, basically. Very, very interesting. Anyway, so how they seem to work is by pushing. So when you do a bioenergetics technique, they say there's 3 aspects to it, and you have to do all 3. First of all, you have to do the movement, and generally it's either holding a posture or doing like a back and forth movement. So for instance, you might hold your shoulders up like that with that example, or you might like keep doing up and down like that. You do one or the other. And so when you do that, the idea is that it makes the brain aware of what the body is doing, right? So let's do the holding one first, right? So let's say you're dealing with a person who's always a bit like that, right? See in my own camera that I'm a bit, lopsided, so I didn't mean to do that, yeah. So equally. So the person is always like that, right? Now, the natural tendency, if you're trying to perfect yourself, which a lot of people are, is when you notice you're doing that, is to drop it, right? Or to try and drop it. Maybe it's not easy, but you'll try and drop it as much as you can, right? A lot of people, they're kind of stuck in place, but they'll drop it as much as they can. The perspective of every system that I found that really works, even in the toughest of cases, is actually not to do that, but to do the opposite, to go with it. So in the cases I just said, with the Reich and the bioenergetics, right? To hold it like that for a long time. Maybe not as long as you can, but way longer than you normally would. Now, at the same time as holding the posture or doing that movement, you also breathe and you stay aware of your body. You don't allow yourself to disassociate. You don't allow yourself to think about the weather and this and that. Like you stay present to the body. And so there's something about that magic about staying breathing, because one of the main ways we repress feelings is to stop breathing or to restrict our breathing. And so to stay fully breathing deeply and to do this movement and to stay aware. And awareness is the part that people are least likely to remember when they're doing something like that. But it's actually the most important part, because it seems like it's like showing your brain what it's doing, right? So if you're a person who keeps doing this, you're like showing your brain, you keep doing this. And then it goes, maybe I should drop it. Maybe I should relax, right? And so it's that awareness. Another thing that's really great in this regard is Hanna somatics. Really powerful as well. Now, they are not intense, and they are not like hold it as long as you can, push it as hard as you can. They're all like do it very gently, but with maximum awareness and also being aware of breathing, right? So very similar, but the difference is they're like, do it really, really, really slowly and really, really intensely and really, really focus on every movement. And then if you notice you're like moving up and then suddenly you get like a twitch, you're like, oh, go back, do it again. Like, because they would say that those twitches are like areas where there is that lack of connection between the brain and the body. So the Hanna somatic school, they see it very, mechanical. They're not that, even though the practitioners I've met seem to be very emotionally aware, but the system itself is focused on the mechanics. It's just focused on make the brain aware of what the body is habitually doing. You make it aware by doing it very slowly, very intentionally, and with full awareness while remembering to continue breathing. So that's kind of, that seems to be, to answer your question, how it does it, how it manages to do it.
We're going to take a quick break to share with you one of our amazing sponsors, Genetic Insights. What makes Genetic Insights uniquely valuable is that they test over 83 million different variants, which guarantees a 99.7% accuracy on all of their DNA reports. With over 100 reports available, you get comprehensive insights into what your DNA is telling you about how to optimize your health today and in the future. I found reviewing my results to be incredibly accurate and applying some of the recommendations, which are personalized to your individual DNA, to be extremely helpful for me and my family. I also loved how easy it was to upload my raw DNA data that I already had from previously using Ancestry.com, because Genetic Insights supports uploading raw data from all major platforms. To get your health reports, go to geneticinsights.co and get 20% off today by using coupon code Rejuvenate. Remember that supporting our sponsors supports our podcast, which allows us to keep sharing this important information with you free of cost. So, go get your Genetic Insights health reports by going to geneticinsights.co and use coupon code Rejuvenate for 20% off today. I know you mentioned that, with the systems that you've been reading on, that, especially that first one, that, everybody has a dysfunction. Everybody has a holding pattern. Why is it that we repress so much? Why is it that we adopt these holding patterns in our bodies?
Yeah, even to the point where it creates unbearable pain, which ruins our life, right? It's an interesting question. I'll tell you who generally doesn't do it: animals in the wild. And there's some evidence to show that even humans in the wild do it way less. So what do I mean by in the wild? I mean living in a natural way, right? But let's go back to the animals. So hopefully we'll be able to find some footage and insert it in the video somewhere around here. But it's basically understood that when an animal goes through a traumatic experience, they basically very quickly, they burn it off, and then they are genuinely over it. They're not holding on to the trauma. It's not stored in their brain. It's not stored in their body. So a lot of the time, they might just run around. Like this happens with our dog, right? I don't know if you are familiar with, if this happens to you as well, Chrissy, but she has something happen. She gets scared by something. Suddenly she's like tearing around like a mad thing, right? And then after a little bit, she's totally fine again, right? So this, and the reason why this is the case, as speculated by Peter Attia, I think that's spelled correctly, who did a great book, among others, called Walking the Tiger, I believe. Fact check me on that, but we'll add the correct link in there. He talked about how most animals go through this process whereby if they get traumatized, they basically, the fight or flight response is triggered, specifically the sympathetic part of the fight or flight is triggered, the fight or flight, not the other parts that we talked about in the stress episode, not the shutdown part. And so what we would do is we would complete that. So I talked about the dog running around like crazy. So that's an example of her just burning off that fight or flight impulse, right? And so they showed there's the polar bear footage. Let's see if we can add that to the edit of this. But basically where a polar bear was chased with a helicopter because they wanted to, tag it and microchip it and check it's okay and all the rest. I believe they were, well-meaning. But they were chasing it and then they tranquilized it. And then as the polar bear starts to become conscious again, it goes through a process where it's lying on its back, it's still unconscious, but it's like scrabbling and like moving, and it's like reenacting the whole thing as if it were running away and successfully getting away. It's like burning off that stress impulse. And so my understanding of because the general idea actually is that humans hold on to all this traumas and animals don't. But I actually don't know if that is the case. I believe that, a lot of those cruel experiments they do, animals in captivity, especially when it's cruel and very limited activity, they do hold on to the trauma, right? Let's say you got an animal in a tiny cage and you're torturing it. They're not able to do that running around thing. They're not able to shake off that pain and that trauma. And so then they are traumatized by it. And, going forward, they're more depressed, they're less confident, all of the rest of it. So it seems to be about being civilized rather than about being human. And again, there's not enough, I don't know how you would even research this, but the tribes that are still living more in alignment with nature seem to have less of an issue with this. They also seem to have their own traditions, customs, I don't know how you put it, to do things, not dissimilar to bioenergetics, not dissimilar to what Peter Attia talks about, where they will do various things, like for instance, shaking, which will help to burn off that trauma that might be stuck in their body. But it seems to be the civilization and the restriction. I think restriction is really the key word. So I'm not against civilization. I'm not one of those, if only we could all, be hunter-gatherers again. There's obviously massive benefits to civilization. And it is what it is, right? In the end, we are where we are and you can't go back. So this is the situation we find ourselves in. But this situation seems to be, it's going back to that repression thing. Like there were loads of benefits to our species in terms of survival and reproduction and possibly even the higher-minded goals to cooperating in large groups, right? But to do so meant that we had to develop more of what Jung called the persona. So basically, we had to be fake to some degree. We had to restrict how we really felt from others and even ourselves, right? In the case of repression. And we had to do this in order to get on. And so, and some of it is necessary, some of it is not necessary. Some of it is just accidental, right? Like we learn that we can never do X because of this, and really it's not even true, but that's just the imprint that we happen to get. And there are these mistakes in nature as well, right? Like the duck who wakes up next to a golf ball and it thinks the golf ball is its mother. Like even animals in nature are able to make mistakes, and so are we humans, right? But, other than the mistakes, just the general thing about I have to behave, right? And then, this is all this is getting deep into therapy, but, there's like the idea of the superego and the ego ideal. So basically, we have this voice in our head that's criticizing us, that's telling us what we're doing is not right. And then we also have this voice in our head telling us, this is how we should be. This is our, this is the ideal. Some people are like upset because they can't live up to the ideal. Some people kind of pretend they already are the ideal and are in denial about anything other than that. I think I've been guilty of both in my life. And then, some people are just depressed and unhappy because they'll never live up to the ideal. There's like different things. But this ego ideal, this ideal of how I should be and how I shouldn't be is, key. And again, we could also kind of call this the conscience, right? And we've seen what happens to people when there is no conscience, right? This is like the psychopath. This is not good either. So to some degree, it seems to be just a compromise. And now, this is speculation. The utopians and the idealists say, no. We could be free of all our oppression, all of our superego, all of our guilt, all of our shame, all of our restriction, and we could just get on happily together. And that seems to be the utopians who believe that. Some people say, no, that's not true. We would be hurting each other, exploiting each other, killing each other. We have to repress ourselves to some degree. Funnily enough, those who are in business of repressing us, like governments and, back in the day, the aristocracy and monarchy and all the rest, are usually on the philosophy of people need restricting. I mean, this is a huge thing going on right now, right? Freedom of speech. What's more important, the ability to speak freely or the safety and the feeling of safety and comfort of other people, right? What's more important? That's that same clash of values going on again. Should we repress or should we express freely? So this is not something that I'm going to be able to resolve for you. Probably it's something that everyone has to consider for themselves. I think the answer to anyone reasonable is always going to be a balance, but still everyone has to find their own balance, right? As to how much do I still need to repress? But anyway, in terms of if you're in chronic pain, you're probably repressing too much. You're probably over the line to too much repression. And, this could be all kinds of things. Other examples I mentioned earlier, but like shame is a big one, right? And some people feel a lot of shame, and shame is a very destructive emotion. It can ruin their lives. But other people, like, who don't want to admit to ever feeling shame, so that's shame repressed, that's often what we call people with narcissistic tendencies. So people who refuse to allow themselves to feel any shame often act in a way that is shameless, surprisingly. And then everyone around them often feels shame on their behalf, right? So it's very easy to say, oh, I'm going to do whatever I feel like, right? I'm going to express myself freely, and if you don't like it, tough luck. And again, I'm not against free speech, but I'm just saying this is the counter argument. Okay, but if you're being particularly shameless in your expression, this does have an impact on everyone around you. So it's not a simple answer. That's the truth. But as I said, some degree of minimizing, reducing repression is likely to be a very good idea if you have chronic pain.
So how do these holding patterns create pain? Because I know we talked about, it's the brain coming in for the distraction, but in essence, like how is that mechanism? What is that? Or is it something physical in the body?
Yes. Thank you for that question, because that reminds me. So let's tie it all together then. So we talked about the emotion, we talked about the holding patterns, we talked about the restriction of blood flow. But here's the thing. Let's say you have this posture, right, that we talked about earlier. Let's keep picking on this one as an example. What's that going to do to the blood flow to the rest of your body, right? Or at least to certain areas? It's going to reduce it because it's squeezing, it's tightening certain arteries, right, that are feeding blood flow in certain veins. It's also pinching and squeezing on nerves, which can also be a problem. I had such an issue with a posture like this that I started getting neuropathy symptoms, which is numbness and tingling specifically down my arms all the way down to my hands. So that's, in my case, it was restricting specifically nerves. In other people, if they have, say, a lack of blood flow to the hands, which is often called Raynaud's disease, that's a potential maybe cause of that, is the restriction of blood flow to that area. And there are many, many other examples of this. I just picked a couple of them, right? If you've got the tension more in the diaphragm, then maybe you've got digestive issues, maybe you've got issues related to lack of oxygen. Like it goes on and on and on. So just the pattern of holding muscles absolutely can, reduce that blood flow, right? I hope that makes sense. However, it goes deeper than that. So there's also this thing called fascia. So I know that you know what fascia is, Chrissy. So fascia is really fascinating. It's spelled Fascia, in case I'm not pronouncing it correctly, but I think I am. When I try to explain fascia to people, I always hope that they've prepared meat before. And I say, when you prepare chicken or something like that, and it's got that very, very thin, but actually surprisingly tough kind of white film that goes over the muscles, that kind of holds the muscle and bone and joints and all that in place. And most people say yes. So that's fascia. So it is this extremely thin, pretty much see-through, although it depends on, some areas it's thicker than others, otherwise white material that kind of just holds everything in place. Now, fascia is really fascinating. I won't go into it too deeply because we've still got a lot to cover and we've really done a lot. But what fascia does, let's start from the beginning. When they used to, they first discovered like how the human body really works by cutting bodies open, right? And studying the anatomy and stuff. And of course, that's still how it's done, still how it's taught to, medical students. And when they did that, they're always like, let's get to the interesting stuff. Let's get to the organs. Let's get to the glands. Let's get to the muscles. Let's get to the bones. And what's all this white crap in the way? Let's just get rid of it. That was basically their attitude, or see-through crap. It turned out that white crap that's in the way might be one of the most important systems in the whole body. Now, this is something that's still being investigated and looked into, and I wouldn't say it has become fully mainstream yet. But for instance, my mainstream physiotherapist I went to see, who worked for the NHS half the time, told me that she does acupuncture. Most physiotherapists in the UK do acupuncture. And the reason that she understands like how it works is that it interacts with the fascia specifically. So acupuncture is interesting because, the nerves, that's one of the other things that, and that's what they focus on. So they focus on the nerves as well, and the veins, the arteries, and all the interesting stuff to them. And so when they looked at acupuncture, they're like, this can't be real. Like some of the points don't even have any nerves anywhere near it. So how could it have an effect on the nervous system when there's no nerves even near it? That's nonsense. But what she told me is that, and there are books around this, that the fascia system actually correlates and corresponds very nicely with the acupuncture meridians. And I think there's a book on this called Anatomy Trains. I think that's what it's called, that goes into this in great detail. I couldn't get through the whole thing, I'll be honest. It's very dense and technical, but I got through enough to get the gist of it. So what it does is it basically shows that fascia has a huge impact on health. Now, one of the things is that it may actually be one of the primary places that trauma is stored, not so much in the body as in the muscles and the bones and the ligaments and joints and all the rest, but the fascia affects everything because it holds everything. And does it have the capacity to tighten up and reduce blood flow? Yes, it does. So it can do that to a muscle, which can obviously create pain to a muscle, but it can also tighten up and reduce blood flow to an organ or to a gland, right? So if you have issues with your thyroid, for instance, we talked about that before, that could be loads of things. It could be, lack of iodine, it could be some kind of toxicity, but it could potentially also simply be that the fascia around the thyroid are pulling it a bit tight and just strangling that full blood flow to the gland. And over time, over weeks, months, years, and yes, decades, that slight reduction in blood flow going in and out can actually cause significant issues, right? So this is speculative, but there is definitely some indication that the fascia is hugely important. And so the fascia as well is like not particularly easy to control compared to muscles and tendons and joints and all the rest of it. For a physio, this is what I've noticed, which is why they would resort to something as, unscientific as acupuncture. Because, getting a muscle to relax or a tendon and all the rest is actually quite easy most of the time. And it turned out, it seems the issue with me that I would go and, to these sessions with these different professionals and they would make the muscles relax and it'd be all great. And then a few hours later, I'd feel worse. And this, because for whatever reason, possibly to protect me from an emotion, the fascia would actually tighten up again just as much or even worse than it was before in these particular areas, which, obviously created these problems again. So relaxing fascia, stopping it doing that strangling thing does not seem to be as easy as having a massage, although it can help temporarily, going to a physio, although it can help temporarily, and yes, even doing acupuncture and all the rest of it, although all those things can help temporarily. It seems to be, you have to actually deal with the emotions that are behind the fascia tightening up in these ways to really address the issue. And so, now that's my understanding. And some people would say, no, what about myofascial release, right? So there's this thing called trigger point therapy. You just get in there like a tennis ball or with a foam roller, stuff like that. That can absolutely help, again, in the short term, over the course of a few days, even maybe a few weeks. But as everyone, even people who are proponents of that system will have to admit, so what they say is that these fascias, the fascia will start to knot in certain areas. And so often the pain, like let's say you got pain, I don't know, here, exactly, but it's actually coming from a knot there, just hypothetically. I don't have them memorized, but something like that, right? And so what you do is rather than rubbing on where it's pain, you find where the knot is, and then you rub on that in various different ways, and then it will release, and the pain's disappeared. It's like magic. It is like magic, and it can be a great, as I said, like immediate relief if you're in pain. And when you're in pain, maybe that's all you care about. So I'm not saying it's not a good idea. But what you may find over time is you have to keep going. You have to keep doing it, right? And so what I want to give you is yes, like mechanically manipulating trigger points or knots of fascia can often help better than all the other stuff. If fascia is the cause of your issues, like I believe it is with my pain, but it'll keep coming back unless you actually address the root cause. And the root cause is the feeling. I also don't want to make it out that like the type of body work that I'm recommending is better. The type of body work that I'm recommending is only better in the sense that if it helps you become aware of those repressed feelings. If it doesn't, then it's also not going to help, right? That really does seem to be the key of it. It should bring them to the surface, and this is why Reich and bioenergetics teachers and all that will generally say you need talk therapy as well, because when those feelings start to come up, you need to have someone to talk to who's going to help you understand what you're feeling and put it in proper context.
I think you've touched on quite a few bits, but my next question really is so if this is the cause of pain, what can somebody really begin to do about it now?
So that's a good question. So basically, anything that addresses, if this is the cause of your pain, anything that addresses the root emotions will be effective. So laughter yoga, dance therapy, art therapy, riding horses, all the kind of slightly wacky, types of therapy that are out there. Anything, if it shifts those chronic holding patterns in your body and it shifts the tendency for you got to go down these neuronal pathways of how you think and how you feel and how you behave and how you respond to the world, anything that works is effective, right? Now, I talked about, my personal favorites already. I would also say there's something called counter strain. If you really cannot motivate yourself to do any of these kind of movements I talked about, then counter strain is something where someone will go in and kind of do that for you, helping your brain see where it is holding in certain patterns and help it release. So that's great as well. But we talked about, often trauma is behind it. And so anything that helps you process trauma. And I mentioned EFT and EMDR. I prefer EMDR, but some people prefer EFT. Both of those can be good. We talked about talk therapy. We talked about Peter Attia's method. It could be anything, though. It could be chakra healing. It could be Reiki. It could be Reiki. It doesn't really matter the modality per se. I've had people, it could be ayahuasca. It could be, if that's legal where you are. It could be anything, right? Whatever helps you to shift that is great. But what I will say, one of the ways you can tell if you're deluding yourself or not, because of course, one of the key things with repression is that often you're not aware, right? First of all, of course, does it help for the pain? That's going to be the primary thing you're concerned with if you're watching this video. But secondarily, also, is there a change in your posture? Is there a change in the way you move your body? Do you feel, I'm breathing more easier? Do you feel, my hips feel more fluid? Do you feel, my shoulders are, more relaxed? Those kind of things are really, really good indicators that whatever it is you're doing are really making a difference on a level that will be long-lasting and profound rather than temporary, I would say.
Sustainable, long term. It's really helping. You're seeing the improvements, even though it may take time, but you're noticing that you're getting out of the pain or out of that pattern, right?
Yeah, exactly. Now, that's like the, incremental approach to it. Some people, though, they want to go for the big, transformation. And so I mentioned Joe Dispenza a few different times. I think I should address that because there might be a bunch of, people who really like that system who might be watching this because I keep mentioning him. And they might say, you don't have to do any of that, Elwin. All you got to do is meditate. So I just want to address that. So again, I'm not dismissing that as untrue, right? But I want to talk about how some of those things, so maybe an ayahuasca experience might be an example of that. Maybe the rebirthing breath work or holotropic breath work might be an example. There are certain systems that are trying to push you to have a real a peak experience to shift the way that you feel. Wim Hof method, actually, I think might be another example of that as well. His type of breath work. Often the breath work systems are especially focused on that, creating a peak experience inside yourself. Now, this can be really, really positive. When I say peak experience, what do I mean? the kind of thing where you feel like your heart is opening, you're viewing life in a fundamentally different way. Maybe you feel like you're getting spiritual insights. I think the key thing is you perceive in a new way that you may not have even suspected is possible, and that you have very intense positive feelings. I would say those are like probably the key facets of it. Again, going back to what we said about placebo, a massive change in how you feel and a massive change in how you see things, right? Those particular elements. And so, people might feel like they're having a spiritual awakening. They may feel like they're having a religious experience, but it feels profound and it feels life-changing. Now, I did also mention ayahuasca. I would say those experiences, when they're chemically stimulated, not just with ayahuasca, but with any substance, even the ones that I might have recommended, are not necessarily going to be as effective at creating real lasting change as the ones that are stimulated through meditation, breath work, body work, those kind of things. The reason being because those substances, while they may be fantastic at removing a lot of the filters and helping you see things in a new way, they are also like interfering with the way your brain normally functions. You may say in a positive way, but they are interfering. And so the problem is, as we said, the key thing is that connection between your brain and your body for it to see what it's doing and change. So if you're having this peak experience that's created artificially and chemically, there is less of a chance that that connection will be made, that bridge between the drug-induced peak experience and your everyday life. And this is why often, again, not always, but a lot of the time, people do these experiences with, these days there's mushrooms is popular, psilocybin and ketamine and, iboga as well. And these are therapies, all of which can have their place within certain contexts in a professionally overseen, managed medical kind of setting. But the ideal would be to have that peak experience through your own effort, because then there is much more of a chance that there'll be that permanent connection made. And so what am I talking about here? Again, I know I keep mentioning him, but I think Joe Dispenza has really outlined that very well. I think Wim Hof actually has done a really good job with this as well. They've kind of isolated that there are specific areas of the brain that are not normally receiving much activity, which get extremely heightened activity during these peak experiences, these spiritual awakening, religious rebirthing, born again, whatever you might want to call it, where you have this profound shift in how you perceive and feel, at least temporarily. And so the way that I think is useful to look at it is that it's like a positive trauma. So when we have these extremely intense experiences, right, when we're raped and abused and, even we break an arm or a leg or, all of these very, very intense experiences, the problem with it is, the reason it's so hard to get over is because it leaves this imprint in our brain, right? Our body really pays attention to experiences that threaten our survival. And so this is the challenge. Maybe you had a great childhood overall and you had great parents and all the rest of it, but like one, hour of trauma and abuse and all the rest of it can be more impactful to how you feel about life than, the first 5 years of upbringing, right? So this is the challenge. And so undoing those traumas can be really, really difficult. I talked about the incremental way of doing it, right? Of slowly bringing it onto awareness and all the rest of it, which is also good and also necessary in the vast majority of cases. But the other way to look at it is, let me create a positive trauma. And so this is an experience that's as intense as the worst thing that ever happened to you, that you probably don't remember because you repressed it, but positive, but life-affirming. And so this is something I wanted to go back to this, that I talked about earlier when I was talking about endorphins, and I said how feeling more pain, which I correlated to lower levels of endorphin, makes you more compassionate. But I wanted to correct that a little bit, is it doesn't necessarily, right? When it comes to having intense pain, intense trauma, all that can be said, I would say for certain, is that it will affect you, but not necessarily it's not guaranteed which direction it'll affect you in. So first of all, there's the whole issue of Nietzsche's phrase, whatever doesn't kill you will make you stronger. Not true. For some people, they go through horrible things and it really does break them, right? But I think it's related to, this is the other thing that I wanted to bring up, and this is to do with compassion and pain. So going through a lot of pain can, yes, it can make you more compassionate. In fact, I think it's extremely difficult to be a truly open-hearted, compassionate person who has not gone through pain, who has not experienced pain, let's put it that way. I mean, like there's a whole story about the Buddha, how someone incredibly compassionate, but it was only when he was allowed to perceive the suffering of others, because he lived a very cloistered, sheltered life to begin with. When he perceived how much suffering was around him and he felt that suffering as if it was his own, that awakened that compassion in him. But anyway, like to really feel suffering, whether it's your own or someone else's, very deeply and intensely, is kind of a requirement for compassion. But you know what else is a requirement for? Great evil, right? The people who've done the worst things in life also tend to have been highly traumatized, and often, not often, always use the trauma that they've been through as the excuse or justification, right? If we talk about the great leaders throughout history who've committed the biggest genocides, right? They rarely do it like, oh, we're going to do it because we want their territory. It's usually they have done something to us that's so terrible that they deserve what we're going to do to them. That's pretty much always what it is, right? That's always what precipitates that. So that's true, with genocides and among nation states and all the rest of it. But it's also true interpersonally between all of us, right? The only reason that I would ever hurt you, Chrissy, or anyone else is because I feel hard done by life. I feel like I've suffered more, I've suffered unfairly, life isn't fair, and therefore I'm going to take it out on you, right? That's really always the justification for behaving badly. Now you could say, some people are just jerks when they haven't gone through much suffering. Maybe that's true, but still those people, the suffering they have gone through, they've taken very personally and they've used it as justification to hurt other people. That's still always what's at the basis or the foundation of it. I would say this is even true of the psychopaths. This is even true of the Jeffrey Dahmers and all those kind of like classic people. They're like, life sucks, right? Life is painful. And even though there's a genetic component to psychopathy, my understanding is there's always that environmental component as well. So even if, both your parents are psychopaths, if you were raised in, impeccably non-traumatic way, you're still probably not going to become one. Like it takes that trauma, it takes that pain to set that off. So this gets a little bit like almost like religious, but we don't have to look at it from that way. We can just look at it, in very, non-religious words. But basically, when you suffer, when you go through a lot of pain, when you go through a lot of intense pain, it's all about how you respond to it. I think I referenced Man's Search for Meaning before by Viktor Frankl, the guy who was in the concentration camps for years, and he never made it mean anything negative. And so, of course, about himself, about life, about other people. And so, of course, after he left, he was relatively untraumatized and he really thrived, and he committed his life to helping people, right? On the other hand, so this is really about how we take the suffering I have. And this is why I think a lot of religions do focus on suffering. There's the whole Buddha story that I just very, very briefly recounted about like having compassion for others' suffering. And there's the whole Jesus thing, right? About being on the cross and having that moment of, God, why have you forsaken me, right? I think we've all been through that sometimes, even the non-religious people among us, right? It's like, why does life have to suck so bad? Maybe that's the non-religious version, right? But it's kind of the same thing. It's like, when you suffer enough, it can be very easy to feel like life is out to get you. Life is unfair. Life is cruel. Life is harsh. Life is bad. Life is evil, right? Or if you're religious, you can turn all that into God, right? God is bad. God is evil. God wants you to suffer. And now, we all have moments like that, right? That was what Jesus is an example of. Like even he had that moment of feeling betrayed and feeling abandoned, right? So I'm not saying if you've had moments like that, you've done anything wrong. But what I'm saying is, I think it's really crucial what you do with that overall. right? All the suffering you've had, all the suffering that you still have right now, do you make it mean that life is, evil, that life is bad, that life is, just fundamentally unfair, any of those kind of words? And if you do, it's very, very tough to be well. It's very, very tough to let go of this holding patterns. And so that's where, to go full circle, the intensely positive spiritual religious experiences can make a difference. Because this is what I've heard Joe Dispenza talk about, and I've actually heard it over and over from a bunch of different sources as well. He's just the most scientific of all of them, I would say. When a person has that experience that they feel like, this feels so good right now, I feel so open-hearted, I feel so spiritually connected, I feel so whatever, that every single thing that's happened to me, all the trauma, all the abuse, all the neglect, all the hurt, all the everything, was worth it because it led me to this moment. Having that as a positive trauma, which, could say is also a very, very intense imprint neurologically that kind of counteracts the very, very intense imprint of the trauma. Having that experience can really shift things. And then you start going, okay, I'm not going to be, even though, and there's loads of biblical stuff, right? There's a story of Lot, for instance. I think, is it Lot? No, Job, sorry. Who like God basically, seemed to kind of sadistically test them with all these cruel things. But, I think if you were to take the anthropomorphization out of it, it's just, this is life, right? Sometimes life blesses you, and then it's very easy to be grateful for life. But sometimes life seems to curse you, right? And make you suffer and give you bad luck and bad news and all the rest of it. And it's understandable then you curse God, right? Or you curse life if you don't believe in God. And it's understandable when everyone does it. But to be well is to go, you know what? Overall, I'm grateful, right? This is like a key element. And so is it easy to get to that? No. If you are full of shame and rage and sadness, should you be focusing on feeling grateful? That's the $1 million question. And I don't know is the truthful answer. Some people, it works to do that, right? They just meditate, they focus on being grateful every day, and then they have the spiritual experience, they let go of all the trauma and they transform, their body transforms, everything's great. I don't know if that's the case for everyone. I think for a lot of us, what we have to do is we actually have to become aware of that backlog, as Jung would call the shadow, right? Like we can't experience the light without exploring and becoming aware of the darkness first. But as I said, those are two fundamental different schools of thought within religion, within spirituality, within philosophy, and yes, even within the area of therapy and trauma healing. Do we need to become aware of those feelings? I think what we don't need to do is have a whole story about it, right? So we don't need to remember all the terrible things that happened to us. We don't have to talk about it. But it seems like, at least in some cases, we have to be aware of those feelings because we have to bring them to the light, as it were. So so another approach is to ignore all that stuff I said about being aware of any of those difficult feelings and just focus on gratitude, just focus on love, just focus on spiritual connection, just focus on opening your heart. And for some people, that's enough. They heal and they become better as a consequence of that. Which path you take is really up to you.
Yeah, I think, as we've discussed in a few of our episodes and our talks together, it's not a one size fits all for anyone. There's going to be many different paths, many different avenues that are going to work for each separate individual. But this has been absolutely fantastic, Elwin. Can you give us just some practical tips for those dealing with pain at the moment?
After talking about religious experiences, yeah. Okay, so let me buzz through those. I thought I'd add some practical stuff at the end, so I've prepared a few things here. All right, so practical tips. I'll try and keep this really short because it's not the main point. But I understand if you're in pain right now, you're like, that all sounds great, Elwin. Anything I can do right now. So one tip I'll give is don't avoid activity. Obviously, this is not for acute pain. If you have acute pain, if you just broken, sprained something, whatever, you need to rest it, right? But I'm talking about for chronic pain. It can often feel like I need to restrict my activity. Dr. Sarno and all these people would say no, actually. Now, does that mean you go from doing nothing to intense exercise at the gym? No. right? Maybe just start with walking gently, right? And build your way up slowly, but to do some kind of activity. Now, having said that, if you're in the middle of an outbreak of pain, sometimes that's not right. And what you really need to do is rest. You really need to lie down on a bed a lot with minimal input from the world. So I'm not saying then, if you're in the midst of intense pain, maybe don't move, but otherwise move, right? Don't be afraid of movement in general, but make sure it is gentle and, more importantly, conscious, right? If you injure yourself, again, or re-injure yourself in some area you've injured yourself before, it's going to be because you're moving in a non-conscious way, not because you're moving full stop. There's another whole area that I haven't even touched upon here that I know a whole school of thought would say is the key to pain, and that's strengthening, right? So there's a lot of people who would say, if you got pain in your back, it's just because the muscles are weak or whatever, right? This is sometimes true. So this is also something to be aware of. This is one of the other reasons I like things like bioenergetics, because they actually do strengthen different muscles groups to some degree. So that does help with that as well. But yeah, it's absolutely possible that's the case. I kind of didn't go over that because that's the very standard advice that a physio or something would have already given you. And I'm assuming if you're watching this, you've already tried that and it didn't work. But if you haven't tried that, that's still a thing. Trigger point therapy, we talked about that already. That can absolutely be very effective temporarily. Substances wise, I know everyone wants the pill. Curcumin has more evidence that it helps to reduce inflammation than anything else that is natural, at least. Obviously, some of the medications are more effective, but also way more dangerous with the side effects and the addiction potentials. So curcumin, zero addiction, almost zero side effects, significantly can be effective for inflammation. There's PEA, phenylethyl. I can't even remember what it stands for. PEA is interesting. It is there's two types of POA. It's not phenylethylamine. It's a type of endorphin that's found in chocolate. That's a stimulant. So not that one. The other one that is an endocannabinoid. That is relates to an endocannabinoid. So it's not cannabis. It doesn't come from cannabis, but it works on the endocannabinoid center in a very interesting, non-addictive way. So if you're dead against cannabis and you don't even want CBD, which can be true because it still has a sedative effect and all the rest of it, PEA can be very effective for pain by working the endorphin channel without sedating you at all or doing anything that you might want to use any kind of cannabinoid for. Having said that, CBD, especially if you can afford to be a little bit sedated at the end of the day or something like that, can be very effective for pain, both in terms of on the brain level, helping you detach from the pain, but also on the immune system level of hitting those CB2 receptors and actually reducing inflammation. DLPA, I already talked about, probably the previous episode, is the direct precursor to the endorphins. So that can be really good. 500 milligrams to 1,000 milligrams first thing in the morning on an empty stomach can be really good. Boswellia is an extract from frankincense. Talked about a lot of biblical stuff today. And available, commonly available as a supplement. There's a certain extract of Boswellia called, I think, 5-LOX often. I personally have not found to be that to be as effective. I prefer just Boswellia, but either you might want to try both. If you have neuropathy, pain in your nerves, as I had, and this is especially common people who are diabetic, then benfotiamine can be really good. More than anything, in some countries it's actually sold as a drug for that purpose, but in our countries it's sold as a supplement, easy to get. That can be very effective.
I have a quick question.
Yeah.
Quick question, because there are some people that are suffering from neuropathy from having chemo. Mm-hmm. Would something like that be supportive to them as well?
It's the first thing that I would use. Yeah, I can't guarantee it. Most of the research has been around diabetic neuropathy, but I had neuropathy just caused through an excess of tension in my neck and shoulder area, and it helped for even that. So I think neuropathy is one of those words that most people don't know what it means. Neuro means nervous system, pathy means disease. So it just means nervous system disease. It just means your nervous system is struggling. And so obviously, diabetes is one reason that the nervous system could be diseased, but chemotherapy is absolutely another one. So anything that nourishes the immune system is actually, anything that nourishes the nervous system is actually helpful. We should do a full episode on that at some point, because I got into this deeply. In fact, I was working on a product with someone, and it was very, very effective. Problem is it was too expensive to make and we couldn't sell it. But, I went deep into this, so we could do that at some point. If you have sinus pain, I'm a big fan of using a spray with xylitol and grapeseed extract. This transformed over 20 years of sinus issues for me. So I'm into it. And again, I'm not the only one. I discovered it through seeing how many people have said that it worked for them. So I like that for sinus pain. Will it help like in the moment, like taking a painkiller? No. What it will do is it's very effective at addressing the underlying chronic infection, which is the cause of the sinus pain. If the sinus pain is caused by the immune system overreacting to something, then it's more, refer to the first part of this conversation for how to deal with that. Gut pain, what I love for that is activated charcoal. Bentonite clay also being good, but activated charcoal being the number one thing. If you have pain, it is often due to gas. And we talked about all that before. So just to say that taking activated charcoal absolutely mop up that endotoxin, a lot of those other toxins. So will bentonite clay, and that can basically soothe the digestive system to some degree. But the main thing that it does is just reduce the gas. Inflammation causes gas, but gas also causes inflammation. So it can cut that feedback loop. And so, when I've had pain in my digestive tract, that's the number one thing I'd go for. And it's also, if you've been poisoned and you go to hospital, it is the main thing that they will treat you with anyway. Headaches, obviously, other than simple stuff like drinking water, we mentioned it earlier, I would go for 5-HTP because it can't really hurt. If the headache is caused by a lack of serotonin, then it will certainly help. But even if the pain is caused by fascial tension, as we've now talked about, it may still hurt. By increasing serotonin, it might calm down the nervous system enough that the fascia releases. So either way, it's certainly worth a try. If you've got gallbladder pain, something I'm certainly no stranger to, again, we could do a whole episode on it, but in a nutshell, kind of to prevent it keep happening, choline will stop that sludge from thickening enough that it gets stuck. And then TUDCA is a bile salt that will also do the same, TUDCA. Again, I won't try to say exactly what it is. I won't try to say the full abbreviation. But basically, this is a bile salt that will, again, help to dissolve bile if it's stuck, and that's causing a gallbladder problem. If the problem is being caused by actual stones and not sludge, calcium crystals, then citric acid is really the thing that will do it. This is also true for kidney stones. This is lemon juice is the other thing. So that will basically dissolve the calcification stones and is the number one thing I would do if I had gallbladder or kidney stones. Obviously, you should be seeking medical attention first and foremost. That's just additional things that you can also try on top of whatever the doctor recommends. If you have gallbladder pain, taking large amounts of magnesium, especially magnesium chloride, can also be effective. What it basically does is it dilates everything, including the bile duct, because the bile duct is this really thin little tube between the gallbladder and the duodenum. Bile should be able to get through there just fine, but once it gets to a certain level of solidity, it can get stuck, and that can cause the problems. So taking a large amount of magnesium can just help to dilate that bile duct and help the whatever's stuck there to then move through. And so that's the number one thing I do, other than obviously seeking medical attention if you have pain in that area. But obviously, I'm not just saying it to cover myself. Do seek medical attention, because if it's an infection, if it's something else, and you don't deal with it, you could die, right? So again, this is only for people who sought medical attention. They haven't helped, and they're like, now what do I do? For the stomach, there's a probiotic, the brand name of which is Pylopass. It's called L-Reuteri DSM, and it's a bunch of numbers. I can't remember. We'll put a link down. But basically, this can be very effective at addressing H. pylori. And again, this is advice for people who've already sought medical attention, but following all the medical steps, because again, this can be life-threatening if not dealt with. But on top of all of that, that can be good. Bismuth can also be good. Bismuth is found in Pepto-Bismol. That's where the biz in Pepto-Bismol comes from. Bismuth can be really effective at soothing that stomach pain, and as can something called mastic gum as well. Of course, so can antacids, but they are potentially more troublesome long term. But again, if a doctor says you need them, then take them. Gum pain, interdental brushes, getting in between every tooth with the right size of those little interdental brushes and doing it at least once a day, preferably twice a day, can be really effective at addressing gum pain. So can using an electric toothbrush, brushing your teeth regularly, brushing them after every meal or every drink that contains sugar or acid. Obviously, you want to do it with a natural, but effective toothpaste, because you don't want to be doing, fluoride that many times a day. But I would hope that you're already on a non-fluoride toothpaste. In terms of tooth pain rather than gum pain, I think that's something that really you need a dentist to address. But in terms of gum pain, you can deal with it yourself. Don't be afraid to really get in there with the brushes. That's the advice I had. I used to get gum pain. And I remember once I went to the dentist, because I was just walking past it that I would go to where the hygienist was. And I asked them what to do about it because they didn't have an appointment available. And they gave me this brush. They got like a brush with just a little head on it that's kind of pointy. I don't know if you know what those are called, Prissy, but whatever they are. And they said, just get in there. Just dig, because they said it's probably something trapped underneath the gum. And I think that's I actually made a philosophy for life out of that. It's so easy when you have pain to try and avoid it and not get near it. But a lot of the time what you got to do is just get in there, right? And so sure enough, I did it. It bled a lot. And then whatever was under there probably, got washed away, and then the pain went away. And so often just getting in there is actually exactly what you need to do to resolve pain. And then, just mouth advice in general. Oh, yeah, mouth ulcers. That was the other one. That's another source of pain that a lot of people have that I've had. I would say avoid sour food, anything sour, avoid anything spicy, and then regularly clean your mouth with an alkali. Some kind of sodium bicarbonate in water, baking soda in water is often good. And if you just stop eating anything acidic, anything spicy, it usually goes away, would be my experience. Now, if it's caused by an autoimmune condition, that won't help. If it's caused by infection, that won't help. Again, I'm assuming that you've already been to a doctor and tried everything. And this is every bit of advice here, I'll say it one last time, is once you've been to the doctor and they've already told you it's nothing, there's nothing we can do to help, then these are my recommendations.
Elwin, thank you. Thank you. I mean, we're really pretty much at the end, but I just wanted to ask you, any other final thoughts before we close?
Yeah, please, if you're not already, go onto YouTube and go to the comment section. Let me know what has worked for you and also what hasn't worked for you. Basically, and it could be about very specific stuff like we just talked about. If you've had, an intense peak experience and it hasn't helped you, if you've, tried Reich therapy, I don't know, whatever, everything. And tell us what has worked for you as well. I'd love to know, especially if I keep seeing the same thing again and again or a few times. I'll probably look into it. I'll try it myself. I want to know, this is not a be all and end all, even though I think we might title this comprehensive, because I think it is. It's comprehensive, but it's not complete, and who knows, right? There may be something out there I haven't even heard of that's better than everything I've talked about. I'm always open. So I'd love to hear from you what has worked for you.
Thank you, Elwin. Thank you for sharing all that you did. And thank you. This is an extremely, extremely big topic. And for you listeners, if you like what you heard, please make sure you hit the subscribe button so you don't miss another episode. And we will be back again. See you soon. I hope you enjoyed that episode. And if you did, I want to tell you about a way that you can support the podcast while also getting great deals on high quality supplements that Elwin and I personally use, and that's Feel Younger. What I love about Feel Younger is that they have great quality products with minimal fillers at a very affordable price. You can call their customer support team 20 hours a day, 7 days a week, and in my experience, they're very helpful and friendly. And the thing I love most of all is the amazing descriptions that Elwin has written about each product category on that topic. And each product has so much education on it that I've actually learned more from reading the descriptions than I have from a lot of articles. So to support the podcast, please use Feel Younger for all your supplement needs. And to let them know we sent you, use promo code RejuvenateMe for 20% off your first order at feelyounger.net. That's 20% off your first order using promo code RejuvenateMe at feelyounger.net.